Okay, welcome to our Chapter 5 discussion today. Hopefully you had a nice weekend. It should be a Monday if you're following along and watching these videos in order. So let's get right into Chapter 5 for a few minutes here. Let me share my screen. I just want to share a couple quick cartoons related to education. Here's a girl trying to slip up the stairs. Dad says, "You got something you want to show me, Donna?" Students weren't too fond of the new enlarged report card, so she wasn't able to slip away with that. And then I think we saw this teacher the other day. Here she is again. "Don't like my teaching, call 1-800-YOU-FAIL." So anyway, a couple cartoons to get us started. Let's go ahead. I'm going to pull up my notes here, and let's talk about classroom learning, what might be happening in different language classrooms. Not all language classrooms are alike. You may have a son or daughter taking German up at Cottonwood High School, and then you have to move, and now you're attending Kearns High School, taking German there, and the class might be very different. The objectives, the classroom setup, the interaction between teacher and student just might be different, mainly depending on the students, or the teacher's preferences and opinions and training. So all language classrooms seem to be a little different. And just hearing you guys describe your language learning experiences from your introduction, I can tell we all had different experiences in language learning. Okay, let's compare a few different language learning settings. Two of these are classroom settings, and one is the natural environment. When we think of natural acquisition, let's think of immersion. You could open up to page 111. That's where we'll see a chart. I'll pull it up here in just a second. But that's where we're going to make some comparisons here and put some pluses and minuses to see if these characteristics are present or not present. So again, natural acquisition, immersion, we can all imagine that. You move to a foreign country, you're immersed in the language setting all around you at school and work, and there's benefits and drawbacks to that type of teaching. Structure-based instruction, when we talk about structure, we're thinking of grammar. These types of classes where the focus is on learning rules and grammar and conjugations. Some of us went through instruction like that in our secondary school classes. And then we have these more current methods, these communicative type methods, or communicative, some pronounce it. These type of instruction classrooms are trying to replicate what's happening in the natural environment, but still do it in a structured 50-minute class period at a high school or at a community center or wherever it might be. So pulling up page 111, if you could take a little time just on your own, it'll help you understand these different settings here and the differences. We're going to see if these characteristics are present in these different settings. So again, immersion, we could do a couple quickly together. Ample time for learning, I'd put a plus there. Absolutely, there's lots of time for language learning in that natural setting. It's all around you. You hear it on the bus on your way home from work. You hear it as you go to the movies at night. You see it and hear it everywhere. There's time for learning. Maybe not so much in these other settings. Pressure to speak, consider that. Should we put some pluses or minuses? Learning one thing at a time. That sure sounds like the grammar classroom where things are presented one at a time, rules and instruction, and you have your test. Kind of different than being immersed in it where it's not one thing at a time. You're just bombarded with information. So go through that, consider that. You've got these bullet points down here that'll help kind of guide you and help you look at the differences between these different settings. Okay, so natural language. You've been immersed in a new country, in a new environment. You're exposed to the language at work or in social interactions. That describes this natural language setting. Structure-based. These settings where you're learning at school, where there's structure, where it's focused on grammar and teaching of rules. Linguistic items are presented one at a time. There's frequent error correction from the teacher. Time learning the language is obviously limited to your class period at school or your afternoon class after work at the downtown community center. And students often feel the pressure to use the language correctly from the beginning. These type of structured classes, a lot of the times the focus is on grammar. Just to quickly show you, here's a few English grammar books. You might go into a ESL class and see this book there, and it's full of grammar rules, one after another, different kind of scripted practices. Basic English grammar workbook, and you can imagine workbooks on pronouns, pages on pronouns, subject verb agreement with titles and amounts. And you'd find these sorts of things in a class that's focused on grammar. And we'll talk a little bit more next chapter on the pros and the cons of that type of teaching. Okay, these more current communicative settings, environments where emphasis is placed on interaction and conversation and using the language, not just learning about the language, but using it. There's little pressure to perform at high levels of accuracy. Teachers use authentic materials in the classroom. Let me just share a couple ideas on these authentic materials. Again, my objective as a Spanish teacher is to teach Spanish, and so I've got a lot of resources here. Magazines in Spanish, newspapers in Spanish. Here's Las Páginas Amarillas, the pages yellow of Utah, Spanish. Here's one I've used before, Apartamentos para rentar. We've talked about cognates. Excuse me, I think you can understand what this little magazine's about, even if you don't speak any Spanish. So lots of fun little lessons you can do using these authentic materials. Now, when these magazines and newspapers were produced, they weren't produced with the objective of teaching Spanish. They're just made for use in the Spanish community. But obviously, there's lots of fun things you could do with magazines and things like this. Oh, this is one I'll tell you about another time. Okay, so authentic materials, we're going to want to use those in this classroom where we're focused on communication and real language, not just the scripted type of language that you'd see in a grammar book. And the reason these different methods became popular is that people were finding out after several years of grammar teaching, structured teaching where you were learning rules and grammar and conjugations, people would eventually get a chance to go to the foreign country and they'd be kind of frustrated. They'd come back and say, you know what, I had 3 years of high school German, but gosh, I didn't speak anything when I finally went over to Germany. And on the other hand, people would immerse themselves in the language environment. Maybe they'd go on a study abroad for 6 weeks somewhere and come back saying, you know what, gosh, when I was just immersed in it, I kind of started to figure it out and started to understand the people. And so there's definitely benefits to being immersed in it. So what we're now trying to do in language teaching is try to replicate a lot of the good things that are happening out in the natural environment, but do it within a structured classroom with 4 walls with a 52-minute class period. Here at Snowcrest Junior High, we're trying to replicate some of the good things that are happening out there in immersion. Okay, some examples of traditional language teaching methods, and this might remind you of your high school classes 20 plus years ago if you attended high school a long time ago. Grammar translation. There's an actual method where the focus is on translating text from one language to the other. These started in popularity because that's how we learned Latin. You'd look at Latin text and you translate into English, and along the way you'd learn vocabulary, you'd learn verb conjugations and so on. So we started doing that in language teaching. Give somebody a story from a magazine or a newspaper article and say, okay, translate it from English to Spanish or Spanish to English. And along the way, hopefully you'll learn some grammar, learn some vocab and rules and so on. Not very engaging. Some of you may hear that and think, oh, that's exactly what we did day after day after day in my French class at Wasatch High or whatever high school you went to. As a teacher, that would be easy. It'd be easy to say, okay, we got 50 minutes, take this worksheet, translate it, and when you're done, put it on the desk. But probably not that effective as far as language teaching. I still do some grammar translation type things in my classroom, especially out of necessity. Sometimes I've got a substitute coming and the substitute doesn't speak Spanish, and I think, gosh, what am I going to leave to keep the class busy and moving along? Sometimes I'll give them an activity like that where they're doing some translating, and I do that in the hopes that they're going to learn some vocabulary and study some rules along the way. But probably not the most effective type of language teaching. Okay, another method, the audiolingual method. It explained in the textbook, this is a method where there's little use of the first language, and learners are expected to learn through repetition and habit formation. See if this reminds you of any of your language learning experiences in high school or college. The teacher says, okay, repeat after me. The butter is in the fridge. The butter is in the fridge. The bread is in the cupboard. Everybody, the bread is in the cupboard. If you were doing that in French or Spanish or German or whatever. That's an example of the audiolingual method, this repetition, habit formation. You're hearing a native speaker of that language say it correctly, and you're trying to repeat it back correctly. Let's talk a little bit about the drawbacks of this type of method. There was a MASH episode, and hopefully I'm not too old that I have to explain the TV show MASH. Most, I hope, can relate to this show. This show took place during the Korean War. Let me present this real quick here if I can find it. I've actually got the DVD at home, and I saw this and I thought, audiolingual method, exactly. So let's watch Frank and Hawkeye do a little language teaching. They're trying to teach the Koreans some English so that they can work in the medical ward. And the method they happen to be using is the audiolingual method. I know this will come up. I tried it just a minute ago. Let's give it just a couple more seconds. I think MASH was the longest running TV show ever. So if you're not familiar with this, I'm sure your grandparents or your parents are. Okay, the episode is Dear Peggy from season 4. And we want to watch English lessons. So again, as you watch this, this is the audiolingual method of teaching.
General Potter wanted to train Koreans to work in the wards. First step was to teach them English.
Do you have a fever? I will get the doctor. I will get the doctor. Better dead than red. Better dead than red. Ah, now we're getting somewhere. Get us out of the UN. Get us out of the UN. Don't contaminate our drinking water with fluoridation. Don't contaminate our Maresy dotes and dozy dotes and little landsy divey. Maresy dotes and dozy dotes. Oh, you sure took your sweet time relieving me. I've been here an hour. We made progress. I can tell you got a Korean accent. Snake fish pot. Snake fish pot. Okay, boys. Notre Dame is 6 points behind. We got a whole half a game to play, and we're gonna beat Army. All right, I'm sorry. I will get the nurse. The nurse. I will get the nurse. I will get the nurse. Frank Burns eats worms. Frank Burns eats worms.
Okay, the audiolingual method. As you watch that, I'm sure you can think of plenty of pros and cons. It seemed to be not very effective in many ways. Obviously, the repetition is good. Hearing the repetition, you've got a native speaker of the language giving you a perfect pronunciation that you're to mimic back, but certainly not the most effective way of teaching. Let me kind of illustrate why a little bit more, explain a little bit. This wasn't from our chapter, it's from a future chapter. You'll see it when we get to page 140 in the reading. But here's the audiolingual method right here. So let's look at this and talk briefly about this. So here's a native, let's say a Portuguese speaker, and he's got an English class, an ESL class. And here's the teacher. She says, okay, repeat, the book is on the desk. And he says, the book is on the desk. Good pronunciation, repeats it right back. I can see two major problems here, what might be happening with kind of the drawbacks of this audiolingual method. If you want to pause for a minute, think about that, or we'll go right into it. What two issues are here? First off, this audiolingual method, it's not too cognitively demanding to sit there and just repeat back what the teacher says. The teacher says something, you repeat it back, word after word, kind of like those Koreans in the medical ward there we saw in the MASH episode. So you might be daydreaming. This Portuguese kid might be on the soccer team at school, and he might be daydreaming about playing goalie later on after school. So he's able to accomplish what the teacher wants him to do, but kind of have his mind wander, not be too focused on what's happening. The second issue, and even worse than that previous one, of kind of daydreaming during this, can you think of what that might be? What might be going on? He might mistakenly be thinking what he's saying here means catching the ball with my hands. He might think that means catching the ball with my hands. He's a Portuguese speaker. He doesn't speak English. He might not understand that what he's saying back means something different. And that may have been happening with those Koreans in the ward. I didn't get the feeling that they were understanding what they were repeating back, and they may have even thought what they were saying meant something else. So that's the drawback to this audiolingual method. Now, it doesn't mean, of course, that we shouldn't have repetition in our classrooms. We should. I do it all the time. But always consider, what have you done to build the background knowledge and to explain the concept, so that when we are doing this repetition, we're understanding what we're saying, not just repeating random phrases and words. Okay. So we talked about designers of these new, more current methods try to replicate some of the characteristics of traditional instruction with those of more natural acquisition contexts. So what you have is this wide continuum in language teaching. You have language classrooms that are focused on form and grammar and rules and learning about the language. On the other extreme, you have approaches that are more focused on meaning and using the language and communicating for real purposes. And you kind of have to see where you're at on this wide continuum. I certainly like doing things in my class where we're using the language for real purposes, talking about things that happened yesterday, talking about the upcoming school dance and who's going, and are you nervous and are you excited, and whatever's happening in their lives. I like using that as what we're studying and talking about in class. But I do believe also there's time to look at grammar and form and the rules. We have two of these Google Meet experiences where you'll log on. I believe the first one is today, this first Monday that you're watching this, where we'll do a little exercise where we're focused on communication, using the language, talking about our families. We'll also have another one this week where I'm going to show you some language teaching that's more about form and grammar, and hopefully you can see the value of both of those. Okay, just a little bit more. There's a couple types of questions we use as language teachers in our classrooms. A display question. The asker, the teacher, already knows the answer in advance. You might ask your students, okay, what time does school start, Javier? Okay, Takumi, where are the pencils? The pencils are in the box on the desk. Good, good. Why do we ask those types of questions? Sometimes we want to check for understanding, right? You know the answer as a teacher, but you want to check and see if they understand the question and if they're able to produce an answer. I just put this last one here. I was just thinking about this. Let's imagine you've had a class and you've learned food items 1 month or one week unit of the month, and you've learned colors another couple days. So why would I ask a student, an English language learner, are bananas pink? Why wouldn't I say, are bananas yellow? Seems like the natural question would be to say, are bananas yellow? Just a quick thought here. Sometimes the safe answer in language teaching or in language experiences is to just nod your head and smile. Sometimes kids nod their head and smile a lot. You might ask them a question. Yeah, are bananas yellow? They nod their head and smile. But if you ask them, are bananas pink? And they just nod their head and smile, it gives you a lot of information. They either don't understand maybe the fruit section of that lesson you had or the colors, a unit that you had. So be careful with this. You don't want to put kids on the spot and embarrass them, of course, but I find myself doing this from time to time, sometimes throwing something out that doesn't just get a smile and a head nod. Sometimes kids can get away with a lot just smiling and nodding their head, and you think they're understanding when maybe they're actually not. So be careful with that. You don't want to, of course, embarrass or call out a student in front of others, but maybe consider doing that. Genuine questions. The asker, the teacher, does not know the answer in advance. You might see a boy get dropped off in the morning by the bus stop, and his uncle's dropping him off, and you might ask the student on his way to school, hey, where does your uncle work? Oh, he works at Home Depot. He's going there right now. Or another time, you might ask a student, what's your favorite thing to do in the winter? Oh, it's too cold. I like to stay inside and read books in the winter. Why do we ask those types of questions? Again, if our goal is communication and using the language, you're going to want to ask these types of questions that keep the conversation going, that are genuine, where you're trying to find out about each other and find out about your student and hear them express language. So we've kind of already answered this question. What's the difference in the kind of language students produce when they're asked these display questions versus the genuine question? These display questions are usually shorter, one-word answers, and then you move on. The genuine questions hopefully lead to more discussion and more language use. Okay, good. We're moving quickly, hopefully not too quickly. There's lots of things in this chapter, but I don't want to go over all of it. I hope you'll still do your reading, and I look forward to reading what you have in your response logs. You may be commenting on different areas of the chapter, but these were the areas that I was interested in and want to share with you. So we'll conclude with this. This is our final part here. Corrective feedback. As teachers, we're there to give correction. Now, there is the debate. Some would say, boy, don't give too much correction. You just need to let them figure out their own errors. They'll figure it out in the same way a first language learner figures out their own first language. You don't need to do a lot of explicit correction. Others would say, no, you're there as a teacher to correct and fix errors so that they don't become fossilized and become somewhat permanent. But let's look at a few different types of feedback. And you personally kind of have to decide where you're at with giving correction in your particular classroom. Explicit correction. And these, again, are on 126, 127. You can open these up, and there's student examples. There's a description of these types of correction. Let me just briefly share with you what I think of these, how I interpret these. Explicit correction. A student comes to you and says, yeah, her is my friend. And you might say, oh, no, don't say her, say she. She is my friend. Oh, okay, she is my friend. Or a student might come up and say, yeah, yesterday my brother goed to the zoo. Oh, don't say goed. That's not an English word. Say went. It's irregular in the past tense. My brother went to the zoo. You need to say that. What's the pro or con of something like that? Explicit correction. The pro would be that there should be no confusion in the student's mind what the mistake was. They've been corrected, and they've learned the right way to do it. The drawback, I would say, is that if you do too much of that, pretty soon this student might not come up to you and tell you the story about his brother at the zoo, or might not talk about his friend or her friend Julie or whoever. They might think, you know what, every time I talk to that teacher, I just get corrected over and over and over, and I'm going to, save my story for someone else. So there's a time for it, explicit correction, but too much, we can obviously see the drawback. And not just in speech, in writing too. When a student produces some writing, I've got this on my desk still. We looked at this the other day. Remember this one? Some student writing from a chapter discussion the other day. If you go through all this wonderful writing of this student and mark it all up in red pen and hand it back all torn up and ripped apart, and as far as your feedback, she might not be as excited to go on and on and on the next time she has to put a paper together. So think about that when we talk about explicit correction. Okay, the next one, a recast. Remember this term. It's on page 126. And you may already be doing it in your classroom. It might be a strategy you use and didn't even know there was a name for it. Here's a recast. Again, let's go with these same errors. A student comes up and says, yeah, her is my friend. Oh, she is your friend? Oh, she is such a nice girl. Julie's such a nice friend. And you go on and on and on. Or a boy comes up and says, yeah, yesterday my brother go to the zoo. Oh, your brother went to the zoo? That's cool. What animals did he see? Did he have a favorite animal? That's a recast. When a student or when a teacher repeats back the same phrase, but fixes the error for him. What's the pro and con about something like that? Obviously beneficial in that the conversation keeps going. You didn't have to say time out, let's fix the error. You just kind of kept the conversation going, but you fixed the error. The drawback, and some studies have been done on this, is that sometimes these recasts go unnoticed. Kid might say, yeah, her is my friend. And you say, oh yeah, she is your friend, what a nice girl. And you go on and on and on. But the student may not have even picked up that you've corrected anything or changed anything because it happens so slightly and quickly. But that's a recast. I use it often. Find yourself doing that with students, just fixing the error, staying upbeat about the conversation and moving it along, but just repeat back their phrase without the error, with the error corrected. Clarification requests. Sometimes we just ask students to clarify, what do you mean by that? Or pardon me, asking for some clarification when they're making errors. Metalinguistic feedback. Again, that term metalinguistic, I think we saw that in chapter 2. As older learners, we understand language, we understand beginnings and endings of words and can analyze our own language. So when a student makes an error, you might say something like this. They say, oh yeah, her is my friend. You might say, does that sound right to you? Her is my friend? Oh no, I mean she is my friend. Yeah, that's right. Or, yeah, my uncle has a car fast. Does that sound right to you? Think about that sentence. My uncle has a car fast. Does that sound right? Oh no, I mean my uncle has a fast car. Oh yeah, that's right. And you go on. Asking them to kind of find the error. I think of the phrase, does that sound right to you? I use that when I'm trying to do this with students. Does that sound right to you? And sometimes if you just say it back to them the way they said it, they see the error. They can see what needs to be corrected. Elicitation. Sometimes there's situations where teachers want to draw out, elicit, evoke a response from students. Let's say Spanish again. We're trying to learn some Spanish. Maybe you're trying to learn the subjects and you're having a kid review for you to say yo for himself and tú for you. Point to a guy, él, he. Point to a girl, ella. And he's saying all these words, yo, tú, él, ella. Now he wants to say the word we, but you can see it's on the tip of his tongue. He doesn't quite have it. It's a big, long word in Spanish. And he's thinking of it. Maybe as a teacher, you elicit that response. You say, oh yeah, nosotros. Right, nosotros, we. Sometimes you just get them started. You elicit a response from them by kind of helping them along. That's elicitation. Repetition, our last one. I find myself doing this a lot. I like this one. It involves the teacher changing the intonation in their voice and maybe even tilting their head to the side to let them know they're confused, to get a response from the student. For example, yeah, her is my friend. Her is your friend? Oh, no, I mean, she is my friend. Oh, yeah, she is a nice girl, blah, blah. Oh, yeah, my uncle has a car fast. Car fast? Oh, I mean, my uncle has a fast car. Oh, yeah, a fast car. That's a fast car. What year is that car? You can even do with pronunciation. Yeah, yesterday my mom talked to the gym teacher. Talked to the gym teacher? Oh, I mean, she talked to the gym teacher. Oh, really? What did they talk about? So sometimes just letting the students know you're a little bit confused, kind of tilt your head to the side and say the word that they said, you know, and they'll realize, oh, that doesn't sound very good, and they'll fix it themselves. So that's repetition. You may already be naturally, intuitively doing that with your students. But take a look at those, 126, 127, review those, think about those, and think of ways you can use those with your students. Again, just a couple months away, less than a couple months, we'll be with students in the classroom, hopefully. And there's different ways we can address errors other than saying that's wrong, this is the right way. So again, that concludes our discussion here. I don't know how long that was. It could be 20, 30 minutes. Maybe I went 40 minutes. We don't know, but we're going to stop this and let you move on with your work. But hopefully that helps a little bit, and hopefully you're doing well. Please contact me with any questions or concerns along the way. Thanks. Bye.